Given the fact that we have the newly coronated king of the UK, King Charles III, and Queen Consort Camilla, should we be anywhat concerned under the green agenda that Britain is putting in place with the farmers? Should we be concerned in the fact that Boris Johnson just came to Texas and met with certain people like Greg Abbott? Use your logic. Think deeply about this. You're going to read some wonderful fluffy stuff in the newspaper about this meeting of Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister of England, of the UK, and they're going to make it sound all good in the newspapers. But when I said think about this, use your logic. Think about what their agenda is. Think about what the agenda is for you buying meat. Think about how they've raised the price of the meat, particularly beef. Think about the fact that Israel has been a leader in creating lab-created meat, and Benjamin Netanyahu tasted the meat that was grown from cells in a lab, and recently did the milk from cells in the lab without having to have cows, Think about the fact that 18,000 cattle, dairy cattle, were destroyed in the fire at the farm down in Texas. Why would Boris Johnson, for the first time, come to Texas of all places? Because Texas, and my mom grew up in Texas. I was born in Texas. I know this. Pretty much everybody knows that Texas is cattle country. And Texas raises the most cattle pretty much of anywhere in the United States. And everything that's done in Texas is big, as you know. It's the Lone Star State, and when they go all out, they do everything in a big manner, because it's a wide, vast space of land of the United States. Texas has thought about seceding from the Union in the past when things were going horribly with the government in Washington, D.C. This could be very concerning if Boris Johnson is coming here preaching to the Texans and the governor of Texas about sustainability and about the meat, the cattle. Now, they're not going to tell you in the article that this meeting had anything to do with cattle, but believe me, it does. Now, considering the fact that I just did a video talking about Boris Johnson, who is perpetuating the green movement and gave his father beavers for his 80th birthday, which I laughed about because they talk about planting trees for sustainability. And the beavers, of course, they go hack down the trees with their teeth. And they do big trees, not just little ones. And I showed pictures of these big trees being, they gnaw on it till the tree falls. And then they drag the wood to the river and they make beaver dams out of it. So what is this agenda that's going on? And we should be very concerned about this. This was just written in the Dallas Morning News. In Dallas, former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson calls for Ukraine support. Are you kidding me? They have given Ukraine billions and billions and billions of our taxpayer dollars without any of our permission. And this should not be. But he's claiming this is what he's coming here for. But he's really an ag country. You have Texas A&M, very famous Aggie college. for ranchers. My great-great-grandparents had a ranch down in Texas, and they had cattle on their ranch, so I know a thing about this. But he claims he's here to say thanks for supporting Ukraine, but also stick with it. What right does he have to come over here and tell Americans that they need to give more money to Ukraine? I mean, we need to take care of our own people here and not be bilked out of all of our wealth out of this country, which is what they're trying to do. Former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson swung through Dallas on Monday to thank Americans for supporting Ukraine in its war against Russia. He insisted that backing Ukraine was critical to maintaining democracy around the world. I'm here to say thanks, but also stick with it, Johnson said during a stop at the Dallas Morning News editorial board. It's the right thing to do, he continued. If we don't do this now, Russian leader Vladimir Putin is going to do worse things, he said. Johnson's Dallas trip included a visit with former President George W. Bush, in which the two talked about the war in Ukraine. And of course, they're all for the New World Order, because his father proclaimed that on September 11th, way back before 9/11 happened, and called for a New World Order. So here he is, part of the New World Order, talking with Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister of the UK, and coming over here and putting his ideas on us. The American Revolution was to break free from the tyranny and all of the things dealing with Britain at the time. So now we got President George W. Bush, in which the two talked about the war in Ukraine before a lighter conversation about art, one of Bush's post-presidency passions. Well, it's nice that he can enjoy art while he sent all of these Americans to die over there in the Middle East in the wars that he established. And they're dead now, but he's enjoying art. On Tuesday, Johnson is scheduled to meet with Texas Governor Greg Abbott, which he did in Austin, where the two discussed economic development. This is not good. This is cattle country, and they want to discuss economic development. Remember when I just told you the shocking news that President Trump had worked with the governor of one of the cities to try to get the United States as a member of the Commonwealth? And the whole point of the American Revolution was to break free from Britain. And now you've got these people attempting this behind our backs. The former Prime Minister also led a Monday lunch discussion sponsored by the Center for European Policy Analysis, where he was joined by Senator John Cornyn and former NATO Ambassador Kay Bailey Hutchinson. The CEPA was formed to ensure strong transatlantic alliances rooted in democratic principles. Well, here's a news flash. We are a republic. Look it up, the difference between a democracy and a republic, and you'll know why they keep this narrative of a democracy in play. But listen to this next sentence. At the Crescent Club luncheon, the Crescent Club, Johnson said defeating Russia in Ukraine was important to stop future assaults on democracy, including fears that China will invade Taiwan. Putin's conquest of Ukraine, had it happened, would have sent an immediate signal around the world that we're not prepared to stick up for democracy, Johnson said at the lunch. It would have been terrible in its ramifications for Southeast Asia in the South China Sea, for over the areas of attention and potential conflict between the great powers in the decades to come. Johnson said because of help from the U.S., Russia would fail in Ukraine. Putin has failed and he's going to be defeated. So it seems to me that Putin is in the way of them establishing this new world order. And in order to make that come about, they have to defeat him. Then he says, the message I want to get over to you today is that you're backing the right horse. That's an interesting choice of words. Ukraine is going to win. Since the start of the war, the U.S. has appropriated at least $113 billion for military and humanitarian assistance in Ukraine. All that remains is to make sure that we do not lose that sense of urgency, that we do not get Ukraine fatigue, and that we have the strategic resolve to stick with the Ukrainians for as long as it takes, Johnson said at the lunch. After the lunch, Cornyn told the news that it was important to continue aid to Ukraine. I've heard from my constituents back home in Texas who are deeply concerned about what these costs will mean here at home, Cornyn said on the Senate floor on the anniversary of the invasion. The point that keeps getting lost in this war is that a Ukrainian victory is in our national interest. The most effective way to keep American troops out of the line of fire is to help the Ukrainians stop Putin now before his conquest moves even further west. On Monday, Cornyn said President Joe Biden would have to show presidential leadership in order to keep Americans focused on why Ukraine is in our national interest. There remains broad bipartisan support in Congress, but the American people need to hear from the President of the United States, Cornyn said. He's got the bully pulpit. First Dallas visit. This was the first visit to Dallas for Boris Johnson, the former journalist and London mayor who was born in New York. Johnson was prime minister from July 24th, 2019 to September 6th of 2022 and was instrumental in Britain's withdrawal from the European Union. His administration was plagued by scandal, including the Partygate controversy involving reports of parties attended by conservatives and government officials at the height of the pandemic, when restrictions on such activities, and I should add, by normal people were in place. When asked Monday whether Brexit was the right policy decision, Johnson said, "It's done some amazing things, but it's still too early to say." As for his first visit to Dallas, Johnson praised the weather and was taken aback when told it was rather cool for Texas standards. At both stops, Johnson told a story about how, as a reporter, he tried to get Bush, then the Texas governor, to give him a scoop about a presidential run. As Johnson tells it, he was wearing his wife's watch, which contained a picture of the late Argentine Marxist revolutionary Ernesto Guevara. He said that in Texas, they took a very dim view of communism, Johnson said. "I was so flustered by this brilliant remark that I lost my train of thought and I didn't get the scoop." Johnson told the news that he was interested in seeing the sights of Dallas, including those featured in the famous TV show. "I want to see the place where they shot JR, he said. And of course, like I said, Boris Johnson was the one who bought the beavers for his father for his 80th birthday, because he has a parcel of sustainable land where they planted trees, and now these beavers are making a home there. And they don't think that the beavers are going to hack down the trees and make a beaver dam out of it. I mean, these people do not think logically, but they're putting all of these agendas on other people's plates and force-feeding it to them. The Austin American statesman posted pictures of Boris Johnson. It says former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson gets a tour of the capital of Texas from Elizabeth Garzone of the State Preservation Board after an economic development meeting with Governor Greg Abbott on Tuesday, May 23, 2023. After the meeting, Johnson toured the Legislative Reference Library and visited the Senate chamber. And while doing all that, let's not forget that the United States of America is a free country separate from England. This is the American Revolution in history. Then they even had the Ross Perot Jr., who took a photo of former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, second from the left. Adriana Cruz, Executive Director of the Texas Economic Development and Tourism Office. Texas Secretary of State Jane Nelson and Elizabeth Garzone of the State Preservation Board after an economic development meeting with Governor Greg Abbott yesterday, or Tuesday, I should say. After the meeting, Johnson toured the Legislative Reference Library and visited the Senate chamber. And I just want to say we really need to be paying attention to this, because while it may be flying kind of under the radar, seem like everything is just, la-di-da, everything's great, they shook hands and gave him a tour. There's more going on than meets the eye. The two most high-profile political candidates for the Republican nomination, former President Donald Trump and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, have both voiced skepticism about America's unwavering support for Ukraine. Trump has pledged to cut a deal to end that war in one day, while DeSantis dismissed it as a territorial dispute which does not involve America's vital national interests, though later partially backtracked. But Johnson told Texas Republicans on Monday, "You're backing the right horse. Ukraine's going to win. They're going to defeat Putin." The lunch was not the first time Johnson has lobbied U.S. lawmakers on Ukraine's behalf. He visited Washington in January, where he publicly urged the United States administration to give Ukraine fighter jets, and privately met Republican lawmakers on the same trip. So he has no business doing this. I just cannot believe they're listening to what he's putting forth. The group wanted him to take his energetic, pro-conservative case for the war out of metropolitan D.C. and deep into Republican territory. We wanted to make that case outside of Washington, where we all live in a bubble, and to really take it to the heartland, to places like Texas, cattle country, to get more support for Ukraine and make the case to people who are skeptical about that support. Well, of course, Texas is a very rich, wealthy state, having the oil fields and riches from the cattle farming. And you don't think that this is what they're after? In reality, in many ways, Dallas and Texas are the center of the Republican debate. Texas will be a key battleground in the 2024 Republican presidential primary. Trump held his first presidential rally in the Lone Star State in March, while DeSantis and former governor of South Carolina Nikki Haley have also been courting votes in Texas. Johnson is very much seen as the architect of the Western policy on Ukraine. Polyakova said, adding that because Trump had nice things to say about him when he was the president, it also gives Johnson a lot of credibility as well with the base of the Republican Party. Again, it says, as well as the private lunch with Republicans in Dallas on Monday, Johnson also met with former U.S. President George W. Bush. Who lives in the city with his wife, Laura. Johnson is due to meet Texas Governor Greg Abbott in Austin, which he did on Tuesday. Unusually, the former UK Prime Minister, who raked in almost £5 million from speaking fees in the first 6 months after leaving office, was not paid for Monday's lunchtime speaking engagement. However, he did arrange the Dallas trip as a stopover en route to the Scale Global Summit in Las Vegas, a fintech conference where he will be paid an expected six-figure sum for a scheduled. Whether Johnson retains the populist credentials to win over the most ardent Trump supporters stateside remains to be seen, however. In an interview with Nigel Farage on GB News last month, Trump said that while Johnson was a wonderful guy and a friend of mine, he had been disappointed by his time in office. Johnson had gone a bit on the liberal side, Trump noted sadly, probably in a negative way. I mean, we're talking about the former Prime Minister of London, of England, of the UK, and we had Trump working with one of the governors. I believe it was the governor, I don't know if it was the former governor in Austin, but it was in one of my prior videos where I read you that article, and it said that Trump had been working with him to try to get a membership in the Commonwealth for the United States of America. So people need to really be aware of this and be very careful. We've had to vote for one side of evil or the other often, and we haven't known the background of some of these people, but it's necessary to do research, to know their backgrounds, even of the great-grandfathers, Nazi sympathizers in some cases with the Bush family. This is very disappointing to find out, but we know that he's part of the New World Order system. So I guess what I'm saying, when they're coming to cattle country and trying to tell the Texans what to do and what to do with their economic situation there, this should not be happening, because we are the United States of America. We're not part of the UK. We're not part of the Commonwealth. Now here's something that's interesting to note in the ancestry of Boris Johnson, which I think you might find interesting. Boris Johnson's great-grandfather was from Turkey and named Ali Kemal. He was born in 1869, the son of Ahmed Kemal, a wealthy beeswax merchant in central Anatolia. It was said that the blonde hair in the family came from Ahmed's wife, Hanif, who was Circassian. Now maybe this is why they had lunch at the Crescent Club down in Texas. All had a traditional education at a Quranic school, but went on to travel to France and Switzerland to study in Europe and to become a successful journalist. Ali Kemal met his wife Winifred, an English woman, in Lucerne around the year 1902. When he had returned home to Turkey, the story goes that he said to her, I have to go now. You will not hear from me, nor must you try to communicate with me. But at this exact time, exactly a year from today, I will be at this bridge in Lucerne. If I find you here, then we will be married. Exactly a year later, as the clock struck noon, Ali Kemal from the far end of the bridge walked towards Winifred. They married in London in 1903 and lived together initially in Cairo. However, Winifred would die in England in 1909 at the age of 26 from a certain type of fever. Soon after the birth of their second child, Ali Kemal remained in England for a while and then returned to Turkey and his journalism and political activities there. He remarried in 1914. After World War I ended, Ali Kemal served as one of the last interior ministers of the Ottoman government. But he was lynched by a nationalist mob in 1922 during the Turkish War of Independence. His second wife took their son, Zeki Kunerep, into exile in Switzerland, and Zeki would later become a Turkish ambassador and survive his own assassination attempt in 1978. After Ali Kemal had returned to Turkey, his children, Selma and Osman, Winifred Kemal, were brought up in England by their English grandmother, Margaret Brune, the mother of Winifred. She had taken back her maiden name of Johnson. After contact had been lost with Ali Kemal during the war, Osman Kemal became Winifred Johnson in 1916, and Winifred Johnson married Irene Williams in 1936. Irene was English on her father's side, but had Feifel parentage on her mother's. This apparently was a noble family extending back to Karl Freiherr von Feifel of Saxony in 1811. Wilfrid served as a pilot in the Royal Air Force during the World War II. In 1951, he began hill farming in a remote area of Exmoor on the Devon-Somerset border. Their son Stanley, born in 1940, was educated at Shelbourne School in Dorset and won a Stapleton Scholarship to Oxford, where he studied classics. He married in London in 1963 and worked in D.C. for the World Bank and in Brussels for the European Commission, and by that time he had 4 children in tow. His work at the European Commission, interrupted by a spell as an MEP, continued until 1994. Stanley Johnson has written 2 memoirs, Stanley I Presume and Stanley I Resume, published in 2009 and 2014. He's been a lifelong animal rights and environmental activist, writing books on these subjects. He climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, the highest peak in Africa, 3 times in his 70s, and has often been politically indiscreet. So there he has his roots in the Islamic Ottoman Empire and, met at the Crescent Club down in Texas for a certain reason of his ancestry. This is really important information, and I hope you're gaining some knowledge from this video particularly. The Crescent Club offers a lavish lifestyle of fine dining and relaxation just minutes from downtown Dallas. For those looking to unwind, our spa and wellness center allow an exclusive area for relaxation. Destination foodies or even Dallas locals enjoy delicious dining experience in our Texas restaurants. So he's over there fine dining, telling Americans to fork out more taxpayer dollars for Ukraine. So they said that he also had this meeting with Governor Greg Abbott for economic development issues. So let's look at some of the meanings of economic development. What's another word for economic development? Modernization, westernization, especially industrialization. So remember what was happening in the UK with them putting these burdens on the farmers so that they could become sustainable and it would improve the community. Part of it was backtracking industrialization, which is what developed farming in the first place. These are other terms often used while discussing economic development. So Boris Johnson was coming over here talking about the economic development here in Texas, which is a community-driven process where communities identify and initiate their own solutions to economic, social, and environmental issues to build healthy, economically viable communities. Do we need the former Prime Minister of the UK to come to Texas and tell the communities there how to live? And there can be no doubt that they were behind closed doors talking about the green agenda, the climate change agenda of the New World Order. And he met with Bush, and we know the Bush family is a big, huge part of that system. You know, it was the Ottoman Empire that was ruling the Holy Land for 400 years, and then General Allenby rode in on a horse and dismounted the horse and walked through the gates of Jerusalem because he believed that Jesus is the only king who should ride through on a white horse. But again, we see economic development is programs, policies, or activities that seek to improve the economic well-being and quality of life for a community. And we don't need the Prime Minister of the UK over here telling the Texans how to improve their community. You know, this is the United States of America, and this is why the American Revolution was fought in the first place. So we got to be very careful about what we see happening, who we're voting for, who we think is good, but really has this other agenda. I was completely floored and shocked to hear that Trump was working with the governor down in Texas, not Greg Abbott, but a prior one, about bringing America into a membership with the Commonwealth. And that's just an outrage to any of our ancestors that fought the American Revolution. So let me tell you, when we're talking about the economic development, what is the economic impact for cattle in Texas? The beef industry is the third largest economic generator in Texas and has a huge economic impact on the state. It is the largest livestock industry in Texas as well. The beef industry contributes $12 billion to the Texas economy in 2015. And don't you know that Boris Johnson came over here to talk about that? And it's known that Hereford, Texas is known at this time for its beef. Hereford feeds more than 1 million head of cattle annually within its nearby feed yards. That equates to over 1 billion pounds of beef produced and over $1 billion in cattle sales every year. They are known as the beef capital of the world. Hereford helps to produce enough beef every year to feed 65 million people based on worldwide average consumption. They also produce 125 million gallons of milk, 100 million pounds of cheese, 47 million pounds of butter, and 125 million gallons of ice cream. I thought that this would be a little bit informative to give you a background on Boris Johnson. And, you know, he's the beaver lover, trying to plant trees for sustainability, and they chop them down with their beaver teeth, as I said before in my last video, and, you know, make beaver dams. So they're trying to put policies in place to affect the communities, to affect the farmers. And you can't tell me that he didn't go to Texas for an agenda to put all of these things in place. So I just need to inform people and put the pieces of these things together so you can see how they're connecting. The article that I read about Trump trying to make America a member of the Commonwealth, and then here we had all of these Republicans meeting with Boris Johnson, really kind of helps accentuate the fact that they wanted to work with the former governor down there in Texas to try to make America membership of the Commonwealth. God bless you, Texas. God watch over you. I hope to visit soon. And by the way, we had the third worst air quality in the nation, or around the world, I should say, because of the Canadian fire smoke coming down here. The visibility was where you could not even see the Rocky Mountains in front of you. It was nothing but a haze, and the visibility's been low for the last, I would say, close to a week. And this is the first day the smoke is kind of cleared out a bit. We got a dab of rain, and just praying for clear air. I've noticed that, you know, it affected people's respiratory. They were warning people to stay inside and all of that. I'm glad that's kind of clearing out now. But it really dipped down from Canada into the United States, into Colorado, and has been quite a problem for quite a few days. So if my voice kind of cracked a little bit when I was talking, it's because it's kind of put smoke in my windpipe, you know, and just kind of made it sort of a little bit raspier. Hope you'll continue to be supportive and loving, and thank you for the prayers of the other people who really did take me seriously, because it is a serious situation that I'm in. And I don't want to be in the situation, but that's the product of somebody's death and the fallout from it. And all I can do is do my best to try to get myself into a different situation. So with that, I'll say thank you for watching. I'll see you later. If you do want to help, it's paypal.me/KKROCOCO. My donation address is Kimberly K. Ballard, Ballard, P.O. Box 246, Niwot, Niwot, Colorado, CO 80544. And also, if you want to read the incredible testimony that the Lord gave me through the Holy Spirit about Jesus as the King of Kings, it's available at olivepresspublisher.com and at Harvard University Library through a Judaica endowment, even though it's a Christian book. So that was God's doing. Okay, enough for today. I'll say peace and love to everyone. See you later on in the next video.